The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. All right, first thing on a rainy winter's morning, southern hemisphere winter's morning, down here in July 2020, here in New Zealand. And it's still dark outside, the rain is coming down, but it's not as cold a winter as in the past. And I'm sitting here in front of another round of evaluations for the 2020 Orchestration Challenge. Starting off with Bobby's score right here. Okay, so what Bobby is attempting to do here is transformational rather than transcriptional, right? So, Bobby, you are reinterpreting the material rather than just dropping the same information onto other instruments, right? Okay, so with that in mind, there is a lot of basic stuff that needs to be fixed in this, and I'm just going to go over here to Home and turn this into a transposing score. All right, so that that immediately lets me know in a much better way what is happening with the ranges and registers of some of these instruments. Once you are a more experienced orchestrator, then it's just better to read things transposed, I think. Unless you work with C scoring all the time, maybe in film or media composing, and there are some countries that where C scores, or there are some institutions where C scores are actually the norm. But I really feel that transposing is best because you get to see what the players are seeing. Okay, so for your winds, you have a very limited group. You just have piccolo, flute, and clarinet, right? Now you could have added more. You could have had like oboes in there, bassoons, and so on. And you just have a couple of trumpets and a couple of horns. But yeah, whether you do or not, if you have a single horn when you have two indicated, you have to tell us or trumpet, you have to tell us which player is playing. So is this first or second, right? So if we assume that that's the first, then we have to write like the number 1, period, right? And now here, this is kind of strange. This the stem direction of this note got reversed. So let's type X there. Boom, right? And these should not be invisible, right? See, so that works a lot better. Yeah, so just a lot of strange stem directions. I'm wondering if this was exported or imported into Sibelius like through via MIDI, which sometimes is the reason for a lot of these strange stem directions and so on. Okay, so that's, that is one thing. Another is like here you seem to be asking for two flutes, right? You've got one voice which is 3 beats long, and then a rest, hidden rest, and then 2 more notes. So maybe this was created just, if this was originally made on a DAW, maybe one of your fingers was sort of resting on this E as you played the other notes, and so you ended up with this kind of an approach. Okay, so I feel you could have done quite a bit more with this score, just in terms of some basic things, slurs, dynamic nuances, and balancing things and so on. Right. So this is really just a very quick sketch from my perspective. It's what it looks like. Okay, and there's so much more that you could have done. Like for instance, just cleaning things up. That's like the first thing, right? So I think pretty much looking at the way that this is scored, you probably did not intend for there to be this sort of Debussy kind of scoring where you've got one long note and then you've got others playing, right? So if you really did intend there to be one voice that was held and then other two playing after it, you should have marked Debussy here. So that tells the one part of the violins to play one part and then the other, right? So that could have been done. And then also, while you do have some smaller slurring groups, there is almost no slurring marked anywhere in the score, right? So that kind of tells the players how to bow or how to breathe, rather than just articulating on every single note, ta 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 ta. Instead, they could be ta ta ta. You know what I mean? So, I mean, obviously you're thinking about it, but you didn't really go and do the work, right? So you have to really do the work in a situation like this. You can't just, leave it to the players, because they'll just play exactly what you have written, and they will leave out what you left out. Okay. All right. So those are just some basic approaches, right? Some stuff, some finalization, some editing that you absolutely need to do. And I would say that these challenges are a good way to practice for that. I mean, there's some things left out, like there's no dynamics on this entrance, right? So how does the player know how loud to play? Same thing here. It's almost like punctuation, leaving punctuation out of a sentence, right? We need to know when we start how loud things are, right? Do we surge? Do we swell? See, you've got the dynamics here, but what happened to the rest of them, right? For everybody else. Okay, so now try not to be too tough on you, but let's let's go ahead and talk about the orchestration of this. All right, so I don't want to get too distracted in approach, because I'm using up about half of your evaluation time to just talk about basics of scoring and so on. Okay, so you're starting off here, and you've got this chord spread out across double bass, cello, and clarinet. Now notice that your double bass part is an octave lower than the actual note in the piano score, right? So because double basses sound an octave lower than written. Okay, so if that's the intent, that's cool, that's fine. It's kind of interesting that you've got a chord made up of 2 string players and one clarinetist, right? And yeah, and it's not exactly the same thing as what was written in the piano part. In fact, you're sort of leaving out, like you put one of the pitches onto the violins. I see what's going on now here. So this pitch should actually just be in the violas, right? Because like you are asking the violin, the first violin, this should be marked violin 1, right? And then this should be marked violin 2. These options are available in the instruments menu of Sibelius. Like for instance, let's go to orchestral instruments, strings. See, like you could select violin 1 or violin 2 or Roman numerals if you prefer, right? And then that just makes it clearer to the conductor and the copyist. Okay. So these pitches should have been given to the second violin or to the viola, right? And then you'd have a chord that is all strings, and this little back and forth here, doubling clarinet and cello, is fine. Okay, however, that just really puts a lot of weight onto that motion, right? That the other players do not have, right? So if you had doubled, say, your double bass with bassoon, and if this note here were doubled with, say, like oboe or some other instrument, then you'd have a much more perfect balance. Okay. Now here you throw in horn, and you're asking for a high written F sharp, and at P, right? So the note to play this. The instrument to play this note would actually be trumpet, right? I would give the G here, right, which would be written D for horn. I would give that to the horn, and I would give this written F sharp sounding B to the C trumpet, right? And then that way you could really control. I mean, that's what you do here, right? Right. So you could really control the dynamics. Once you get above the staff or at the top of the staff, it's really hard for horn players to control just how soft they're playing, right? Now I'm noticing that there are no dynamics really in here to tell the players what to do. In fact, there's no dynamic marked here at all for the piccolo. So how can anybody balance and know where they're going, right? So you've got to figure out, when you've got dynamics marked for piano that are a little inconsistent, like they are in this piece, you have to decide whether or not you're going to use them or just come up with your own scheme, which is probably better. Like the crescendo to mezzo forte, a lot of people did, which I feel is a better approach, right? But if everybody is going to crescendo to mezzo forte, it needs to be very clear and marked in all parts. And of course, it's best. You've probably been watching some of these other evaluations. It's best to keep the brass a little bit softer, right? Now, speaking of balance problems, now we're going into the development. This timpani is basically going to drown out everybody. You are not going to be able to hear anything but the timpani playing. Forget about. I mean, even as you are going diminuendo to mezzo piano right here. Forget about hearing the harp at all, right, until you get to about right here. And maybe even then, not so much. Pianissimo harp and mezzo piano diminuendo to piano timpani, the timpani wins hands down, right? You cannot assume that all of these instruments balance together at the same dynamic, okay? So the first rule of thumb is that brass are always 1 degree louder than the winds and strings at the same dynamic markings, right? So if you mark mezzo forte for everybody, the brass will stick out. Now, a lot of times they will balance themselves, being aware of that, right? But if you want a perfect balance right in here, and you're starting off piano, I would say pianissimo for your brass if you don't want them to stick out. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then being aware that if you push instruments like horns very high above the staff, then they really start to get penetrating and shouting, even if you mark them at a soft dynamic. So here you've got this high written A sharp, and that is going to yell. You can mark it piano all you like. It is still going to be a very, very bright note, and so is the F sharp below it. So, and let's look at the, what would that actually be in concert pitch, right? Let's turn off the transposing score. So that's these two notes. So why do we have the horns playing a trumpet part and the trumpets playing a horn part, right? Just reverse the reverse these two, and then you have a very controlled. You have pitches that can be very easily controlled. One of these days I'm going to have to memorize the key command for transposing score, but there are just so many key commands and so many different applications. Okay. Now, as to the scoring in here, I mean, it's, as I mentioned before, it's transformative rather than transcriptional. So you were just experimenting with, adding bits and pieces, and it more or less works. But there's still a little bit of work you need to do to make it smoother. That's like, adding some slurs, balancing things better. Like right here, the flute is an extremely weak register. Here's where you could have really used piccolo, right? Like look how low you get here, down to G sharp and E, right? Which is supposed to somehow compete with staccato, mezzo forte staccato violins and pizzicato and so on, and this brass in its very, very high register, very shouty, right? So these pitches right here would be so much better on like clarinet, oboe, other instruments that are brighter, stronger. So pretty much anything in the first octave of flute has to be treated with kid gloves. It has to be treated very very carefully by the orchestrator. And there's just so many of these scores where the low register of the flute is just, is taken for granted that it will balance with everybody. That's just not true, folks. Okay? Just, you have to be really careful. If all of those would, I would say it would save me so many explanations and corrections if people had just scored a lot of that stuff for clarinet rather than flute. Okay. So once again, really, really high scoring for the horn, which is going to shout out with, against all of this pianissimo stuff going on, right? Now here I feel that you could have contrasted rather than doing the same exact strategy, almost exactly the same notes with all parts, except just like less texture from the trumpets. I feel you could have contrasted the call and response, right? It almost is just like a call and an echo on the same instrument. So call and response on other instruments, and then that gives you more things to do as an orchestrator. Okay. Finally, we end up with bum 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 bum. There is a little problematic. You've got some notes wrong here, like for instance, you've got D sharp still in the piccolo. All the same, I just feel that here is especially a place where you would have, like, having more winds would have been really important. Here you give your second violins the melody rather than your firsts. And, it's not necessarily a mistake, but it's just that, like, you are asking everybody in the orchestra to look at the seconds, and they're not really the leaders of the orchestra, just subsidiary leaders, right? So it's really better to ask the firsts to take that leadership role for the best results, especially in like a semi-pro situation. All the best players will be sitting in the firsts, hopefully, right? So if you just reverse these, you get a much better effect, right? Now, the very last thing that I would say is, you go da 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 dum, and then you have this high piccolo note. I think that takes away from the flow of the music, right? Ba 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 bum bum. Right, and then yes, if you want to do this kind of upwards rising, it's kind of interesting that you use staccato here. Which like will be kind of like a cut-off sound, like deet, 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 deet. You're not really getting the like you can mark staccatos on those all you like, and your sound set doesn't really know how to process that, right? It just interprets the it doesn't know how to do staccato really on a glockenspiel, but it'll really be like cut off with a percussion with an experienced percussionist, they'll cut off the notes as they go. And same thing with the harpist. There's a kind of secco sort of playing on harp strings, and that's what you will get there. So I don't know whether that's really what you intend, is the kind of flowing legato sort of a sound. Okay, anyways, all that aside, I thought that this was a really good entry to start with because it gave me a lot to talk about in terms of like being a developing orchestrator and some basics about the ranges and everything else. So I would just say, Bobby, just take more time next time. Like, please do enter the Orchestration Challenge for 2021, okay? And just take as much time as you need on your score. Think about some of the things that I talked about in terms of finalization, making sure that the dynamics are consistent across all instruments, making sure that you add slurs, making sure that the entrances are marked, like which player is going to be used. Please use more winds. And don't drive your brass too high if you are in a and your flute's too low at the same time. There's just a lot of basics. So I really strongly recommend not only that you take this advice to heart, but please do watch a bunch of other evaluations for this and think about some basic scoring approaches and some other things. And please do enter the Orchestration Challenge 2021, and we'll see, how far you've come along. One last thing. Did you intend to do staccato on a half note? Right? So watch out if you're importing MIDI information, just that cleanup, definitely do cleanup, right? And just really think about the consequences of really loud, obnoxious instruments blasting through your beautiful tapestries and textures, all right? So thank you so much for your score and for subscribing to the Orchestration Online website newsletter. And there should be a new newsletter coming out in a few days. All right, now on to our second score for this round. And now another transformational score, this time from Thomas. And yeah, so what is transformational? There are approaches here where the original information in the score is taken a little bit further. So, for instance, we have the motion here of a perfect fourth. We've got some other harmonic information in here, and of course, like the most transformational thing here is turning the first note, that E, into a melody note rather than allowing it to sustain as a harmony note, right? So it's just a question of whether or not you feel that the E is worth preserving as a harmonic pitch. Now, the problem is when you get to here and the E is removed, the context of this chord is diminished. Well, okay, all right. The context of the chord is diminished. That is something you do not want to say in a harmony class. The impact of the chord is lessened somewhat, right? Because because the identity, the function of that E is, which changes with the change in pitch in the middle, that's no longer preserved. So, anyways, not to get into a big harmony discussion, which I'm sure I will just, since my I just really am not that interested in teaching harmony. I would say that like do that at your own risk, right? However, the whole idea of bassoons playing in close quarters with flute is totally fine. However, you're not really telling us which player to play, right? And you're just saying solo, right? So you're saying, oh well, assume that it's first flute, but that there is absolutely zero assumption that a part marked solo will be the first player. So this is another bugaboo I am seeing crop up a lot in this round. Not in this round, in this challenge for 2020. That a lot of people marked solo when what they really meant was one period solo, right? So you've got to tell us who this is, right? It's not enough just to mark solo. It's sort of like there's a couple of people who who you hired to do some work on your garden, and you say, well, there needs to be some very specialized pruning on that tree over there, and one of them is is really experienced with pruning, and the other guy just knows how to mow lawns, right? So what if they just assume that the guy who mows lawns should go do the pruning, right? And you end up with a bunch of wrecked trees. Or what if somebody just assumes, well, it's a solo, doesn't say who it is, let's give it to the second player, and that second player did not even know that decision was made for them, and they get the part, and they're assuming that their job is going to be the normal one of just kind of showing up and supporting the first, and now they've got to play a big solo, and they were actually studying for the real estate exam last night. Okay, now this might all sound funny, just like kind of absurd, but for serious, those are the consequences of just making a little error like that, possibly, because you never know what's going to happen in a semi-pro situation, which is really the bread and butter of beginning orchestrators or people, semi-pro orchestrators. People are getting started with orchestration as composers. Okay, so you just really have to not end up with any raised hands in rehearsal if you can at all help it, and just really just do the most ordinary. Okay, so there's a bunch of other things here. You go 1, 2. We already know that at the beginning, so you don't need to mark these. Okay, now maybe this was intended to be marked here. But here it seems to me like this is just a simple harmony, which actually should be given to this note here should be given to the second player, because it's better to have a close harmony like this that has to be delicately played by the two players who are the best at playing together, when that is the first and the second. All right, go read my tip on horn section roles and relationships, which is just free for anybody to read. It's in 100 More Orchestration Tips, but you can also read it on the website. Okay, all right, so let's get back to the orchestration. I'm trying to be a little bit more disciplined about this and talk more about this. Now, this is nice. I really like the this is all good. First oboe doubling the seconds, and then we've got these pitches here divided up amongst the lower winds and the strings. I would say here, don't mark pizzicato as dotted half notes. It's just not going to happen in the cellos. It'll sort of happen in the double basses. It would be better just to have like a half note, or just have a quarter note, but say pianissimo sostenuto, right? So the player will just like let it last for as long as it lasts. But unless you're going really fast, it says accelerando, allegro moderato, but it still is not enough to really sustain the sound all the way through. All right, it's just a small point, but I mean, I'm seeing a little bit of confusion over the sustain of pizzicato, and that is another tip that I've got in one of my orchestration books, one of my orchestration tips books. All right. Here I would have this. So you've got a tie across here, and then play. Here I would actually put the slur right here at the end of this note. It's just less confusing. All right. And I would actually have these be separate voices. All right. So the lower note should be second voice and the upper note should be first voice, right? Just clearer in situations like this. And then here we've got this, adding G sharp and then slurring down on both sides. Here I would just have the same thing, two voices, divisi, and then separate voices going to, then like the upper voice just slurs up, right? And then, because this just is really confusing the way that this is scored. And here, just get rid of this big piano slur. Nobody needs that. The context is in the music, that there is an overall phrase. There will be absolutely no confusion, but what will happen in terms of confusion is if you leave that big line over that, right? Because some players might just say, oh, well, I can play this all in one breath, and I'll do it in one breath, right? And then if you had wanted the effect of matching slurring, bowing to breathing, then you've lost it because you gave them two choices. Just get rid of this big one, all right? Okay. All right. So the horns coming in here, mezzo piano, that's all good. And then you have a little tish here on the crash cymbal. Crash cymbal. Piatti. So that sort of means the same thing. Right, so plates, right? So you've got, I think you mean suspended cymbal. Is that what you mean? Right, because here you got the roll and here you got the tish and so on. So the problem, this is yet another tip you should go read, and that is, I have a tip on cymbals on the website, or it's also in the percussion section of the new book, all right, where I talk about naming things, all right? So I think you're really confusing the issue by using the Italian for cymbals and then also using crash cymbals. So some people say, oh, there's crash cymbals and there's clash cymbals. And so really the best thing is to say cymbal pair, right, if you're dealing in English, right? So cymbal pair means the ones that you hold and crash together, right? But some people feel that was what crash cymbal means, so it's better to say suspended cymbal. Right? So suspended cymbal pair, right? Okay. And you could have that all on one line, right? So you don't need two separate lines. You could have one line that, you've got you just basically S-U-S-P or S-U-S period. It's better to S-U-S-P because suspended rather than, S-U-S could be confused with sustained or something. So S-U-S-P period, and then tell us which beater you want on that. Do you want to, if you don't mark anything, you get sticks, right? And you might want, soft mallets, right? Rather than drumsticks or snare sticks. And then here, you could say pair, and then they'll clash them together, and then back to S-U-S-P period, and then whatever, maybe soft mallets, and then a whoosh going into there with your glissando. Okay, so now let's talk about the orchestration of this bit. Okay, so you start off nice and strong, okay? However, your low flute, which was so brilliant right in here, because it's unaccompanied by anything but just a couple of bassoons and a little bit of harp, right? So everybody can hear that flute clearly. First flute, right? But here you got your second flute basically doing the clarinet's job, right? You've got it positioned in a range where, it's kind of nice to have that cool sound accompanying the second violins, but second violins playing forcefully will basically take away most of the tone color of that flute, and you're just not going to. You might hear a little bit on the D sharp and the C sharp, but pretty much those lower pitches are just not going to be heard. Why not A2, right, at the top to really make this soar, and then replace this line here with one or two clarinets, or maybe this could be a clarinet part, and then you could have your oboes play A2. Now here, like, you have this massive amount of weight here. A2 horns going bum, bum, bum. And you know, all four horns, and that is just going to what you're going to hear. You're going to hear bum bum bum, and oh, by the way, da 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 dum, right? So I would say cut it down to two horns and mark them mezzo forte, right? And then this right in here, mezzo forte to P. Nobody's going to hear this element of harmony at that dynamic. You know, you might as well have it just be, and I think you're going mezzo forte piano. It's sort of like a forte piano accent, right? So it will be completely buried by what's going on in the other instruments here. I mean, like maybe the trombone would have a chance at that, but you just cannot give that to oboe on a low note and expect it to balance with the rest of the orchestra there. All right? I mean, so I understand the idea that you're trying to do there, but it's just not feasible, right? Especially with you got this big timpani in here. You got cymbal crashes and these poor little elements right in here, like low flute and I mean, now right in here, like you'll hear these two notes, but wouldn't it be better just to give the second line, the lower line, to clarinet all the way through? Especially like look when you get here, you've got first oboe doubled with the first flute, okay, but then you've got this poor second flute expecting to compete against a horn on the same pitch, and also, first and second trumpet. There's just no way that this flute is useful for anything at all whatsoever in this kind of a sound. And in fact, you can just hear it in the mock-up that you cannot even hear winds at all here, just because the overtones from this brass is just blotting out anything. So just leave them out, right? Just poof, make them go away. Make this all about brass right in here, and then I mean the glockenspiel too is just is inaudible pretty much, and then have them come back in here where that really makes a difference. But all the same, just you might not want to have clarinets and second flute play together, just in terms of like the second flute being I would actually do A2 flutes on top. That gives a nice a nice firm sound combination to the top of the line here, and then just let the clarinets do what they're doing, right? They don't need any doubling at all, and then that combines well with the middle strings right in here. All right, then we got bum 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 bum, and it's basically just strings with a little bit of firming up from clarinets and from first clarinet and first flute on the top. And it just really does not matter. Like once again, people are just scoring low flute in places where it doesn't really contribute a whole lot, right? And here we get, by the time we get to this F sharp, with the clarinet in there, it's kind of pointless to have the flute, right? So I would say just leave out the flute completely, right? And just have first clarinet right in there. And I mean, you really want the focus to be on the harp, right? It's kind of like you want the harp to contribute something, and the glockenspiel as well. So they should be marked up to mezzo forte, right? And in fact, like they could be marked up to forte, and this could go back to being mezzo forte, right? So that it really has a strong contrast with what came before, rather than just like kind of being a little bit lukewarm compared to what happened, right? Mezzo piano is a sort of a lukewarm dynamic. Okay, so but other than all of those little corrections and suggestions, I really like this score, and once again, I feel that this is kind of more transformational than necessarily transcriptional. So great work, and it would be really excellent to see your take on next year's orchestration challenge. So thanks so much for subscribing to the website, And like I said before, I think there's going to be another newsletter coming in a few days. So on to the next evaluation now. And yet another transformational score. So I think that may be the theme for this particular group of scores. Now, there was quite a lot. In fact, like the entire entry was orchestrated by you, Guillermo. So I would suggest if you're going to put this much effort into these challenges, then seriously consider supporting on Patreon at the Brev level or dotted Brev level, so that I can really cover everything that you need me to say, because this really is worth of a 40-minute evaluation or 50-minute evaluation. There's just so much to cover that I really can't in the 10 minutes plus. It's kind of turning into 15, 16 minutes. That there's just so much to say, and I'm going to run out of time and probably go over with this, right? So just to let you know, like, if you're going to put that much work into it, then it really is something that I think you owe it to yourself to to get a fuller evaluation from me. All right, so let's talk about a few things that I mean, looking at that, there are so many things. It's just a question of like whether or not you really need them, right? Like here, do you really need to go to do you need to have Sol C right here? I don't know. I don't know how much that adds or not. You certainly do not need to mark bowings for these people. They are totally going to be fine. They know what to do. All of these bowing marks are completely unnecessary. You could save a huge amount of time and just get rid of them. Do not bother putting them in there. The players know what they're going to do, and it's really all up to the concertmaster, how to bow things. Okay, so that's the first thing to throw away. Now, the second is just like little bits and pieces, which I'll talk about, but as we go along. But let's sort of break down the orchestration as we go. So you're starting off with solo first, right? So notice that's one way to do it. It's probably better to say one solo, right? So just tell us which player's playing first, and then if they're playing a solo, write that afterwards, right? So here you have oboes 1 and 2 solo. Who's the soloist? Once again, same as the last score, you got to tell us who this person is. Is it the first or the second, right? And you don't need to capital, you don't need a capital letter on solo. Just, one period, small s, solo, right? It's fine. Okay. Now, this is kind of interesting. You have mezzo forte for your first flute, and then you've got piano for your solo oboist. You don't need to do that. Have everybody be the same dynamic except for your brass, okay? So I think just get rid of these dynamics, these surges here. Give the surges to the melody, right? The surges are in the melody. They're not in the accompaniment, right? If you look at the accompaniment of the piano, there's only a single note that changes between the first bar and the second bar, right? It's this pitch right in here. That second pitch is not playing any louder. It's the melody that's playing louder, right? So let that be your guide. So you could be piano espressivo, crescendo mark, diminuendo mark, and then everybody else just be softer, right? You could even, if you're worried about it, you could even mark them pianissimo, right? But there's really no need for this flute player to start off mezzo forte and then the oboist to be piano, right? They should both be piano starting off. Then you have somewhere to go to, right? You can have them go up to mezzo forte without getting to be too loud, right? Now we don't have any kind of destination marked here, right? So like crescendo to what, right? And then here you have F dolcissimo, and we don't, there's no guidance for the other players as to where they're getting. That said, I really do like this finger tremolo going on here in the clarinets. That's very cool. I like the trading off between the oboe and the flute going up. That's all nice. The way that this is kept softer, and it doesn't overwhelm the flute in its lower and middle registers. And then of course the oboe is perfectly fine there, and then things sort of build and get higher, and this is all fine. Okay. Now, for this harp right in here, the notation here is perfectly fine, except you have got to give us a diagram. Okay, so that is something you can generate using the harp pedal plugin, this thing right here, which you can get from Add Harp Pedaling. You can get that from the it's actually not that, it's this Harp Glissando. Okay, so Harp Glissando, you can actually generate a diagram for your glissando and make sure that it's in the right key. So like say that you were doing this in B major, you could get this glissando to generate the right pitches and also to leave a diagram. Okay, all right, so that's my impression of the opening. I think it's all fine. You just really don't need, absolutely, please, people, do not add these bowing markings. It is enough for you to mark credible, usable, workable slurs. Okay, and some people think that that's what I mean when I say bowing, right? Like, I did a whole thing on like not using bowing markings, these up bow and down bow things, and says, and they're saying, but you say to use slurs, so should I not use any slurs? So thinking that that's what I meant by bowing, right? So bowing markings, right? Up bow and down bow. Slurs it's not marking bowings, it's marking slurs. Okay, let's agree on that particular nomenclature. All right, so now we got cellos unison with violas. Ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum. I like that. That's really nice. And this is nice the way you reach up. And then become part of the bass. That works great. Okay, and I like the Divisi violas. That's all cool. All right, and then so flautando. Okay, so I mean, this is a really highly spiced piece, and it's transformational in terms of these little elements that you're adding, right? And then things like this. So this works really good, and then this doesn't, right? And it's just a matter of volume, right? So this is something like this right here would be better for flute, and this would be better for oboe, right? In terms of audibility, or clarinet, right? Maybe mix it up a little bit instead of just having the same instruments play the same functions, right? But I mean, it would be hard to do this on clarinet when you've already got this kind of lower middle register stuff going on right here. So I would just say switch these, and I think you'd be fine. A2 on this, and then that, I think that would be a lot clearer, and you would hear this a lot better. I do like the English horn doubling, the strings right in there. That's a really nice sound. You could also use just like some soft horn doubling and get almost the same effect. And the other thing that's transformational is like your harmonic motion, right? In some of these some of these phrases, is you're really changing Lili's harmonic context. The problem with harmonic motion in this, and once again, not to turn this into a harmony lesson, because look, I'm not the greatest harmony teacher. I'm careless. I just, I have not spent years and years defining harmonies vocally on the fly for students, right? So that doesn't mean that I don't know my stuff about harmony. It just means I'm not that I don't even care about teaching it, right? So I'm not the right guy to come to for a harmony lesson. However, I do know when it's being altered and shifted around and stuff. And one of the things about this piece is that Lily relies on a lot of suspensions, and she relies on a lot of pedal tones, right? Of just like having the harmony grow above above a root that stays the same, right? So the context of the harmony above is always changing in relationship to what's happening below. But when you take the bass and you change it around a little bit, like you're doing in here, then then that changes the whole feel of the music, right? So just watch out about that. I mean, I'm not saying that it's good or bad or right or wrong, but it certainly becomes less Lili, right? That's the price. Okay. But back to the orchestration, I don't really think you need flautando here. I think it would be good enough just to say sul tasto. I think you'd get the right effect right in here. So flautando is kind of a fast, light bow close to the fingerboard usually, right? And it's a quality rather than an exact technique or position. And I mean, it still will work fine. You don't have to take it out, but just. And then here you go to sul ponticello. I think pont ord. I mean, that's clear enough. You don't have to say sul. So just looking at the different bump, 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 bum. Right, and then, sorry, so right here, you do a slur over tenuto staccato, right? So do you know what tenuto staccato sounds like? Right? It's unga. Unga, unga, unga. So how can you slur that? Right? There's no need for it, right? So like putting a slur over tenuto marks sort of implies portato, but that's not portato, right? You say potato, I say portato, right? So it's unga, unga, unga. So there's no need for a slur, right? It's just it's a sort of a pussyfooting kind of kind of an articulation. So just get rid of slurs. They don't add anything, and neither does this really. Then bum 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 bum. Yeah, I mean it pretty much works. Yeah, and then soft horns coming in here, and you've got a little bit more motion. Motion, not emotion. Continuing the motion, this falling motion is great, except it interferes with the feeling of resolution, right? So it doesn't really feel resolved going forward as much as it could, right? There's no moment of where there is arrested motion, right? Because we're continuing the motion going on in here, almost as if things don't want to settle. I mean, look, it's some cool scoring. Don't get me wrong, and I really like the contrasts of like staccato versus slurred and tremolo and everything else. I think that is a really rich portrait, and once again, I would just really love to give this whole score more attention going forward and into the next part that you orchestrated. Just be aware that harp harmonics are very, very soft, right? I don't think that you can get away with mezzo forte clarinets and bass clarinet and this much density of texture and harp harmonics. They just basically don't add anything at all here, right? You'd be better off giving your it's just figuring out if you could go Divisi with one of these voices and making it pizzicato if you really wanted that kind of plucked sound. Now here, this adds absolutely nothing, and it is really close to the edge of where harmonics are possible. That is assuming that you really intend, like, the problem with Sibelius is that it will play, it'll give you these harp harmonics at the pitch, right? And actually, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to notate it so that it sounds an octave higher, and that should be the default, by the way. Anybody out there listening to me from Sibelius, note performer, anybody who has any control over this whatsoever, I am tired of this crap. Fix it so that it sounds an octave higher. That is what harpists want. That is what I want. All right? Make the change. Make it now. Anybody who can possibly do this. Sorry to get upset about this, but this sign should indicate that there's a harmonic sounding an octave higher. And it's getting close to the limit of where that can actually happen, right? So the staff is pretty much, I would say, just the grand staff is pretty much, grand staff, and then maybe up to A above is the range of usable harmonics. So if you had actually intended for the player to pluck the string an octave lower and sound a harmonic here, that's impossible, right? You just might as well just have those notes. And you know what? I mean, do they really contribute against a cello pizzicato? Can that really even be heard? It probably can't. All right. So, sorry to slightly lose my temper there, but I'm just getting a little frustrated by, the nebulosity of it. The harpists do not need that indecision of whether, what do you intend there? Is this intended to be unison with the cellos, and then it's not going to be heard. If it's intended to sound an octave lower, then it's impossible to play as harmonics, right? So, anyways, that's my rant. Sorry about that, Guillermo. I really liked your score. I'm really glad that you entered it into this year's challenge. And yeah, seriously, next year you put this much work into it, you kind of owe it to yourself for me to give you a longer evaluation. All right, but great work, and I'm really hoping that to see your score next year. I think you would really like that particular selection. All right, so we're about almost halfway through, so on to the next evaluation in this group. Okay, and now to Noah's very cool brass score. Okay, so I've got a bunch of things to say about this, Noah, but I'm going to try to keep it brief because I think just more focused, faster information is the way to go here. Okay, so I actually did a little bit of research on you in order to give you useful advice about this. And I see that you studied at university in Philadelphia. It says now you're a resident of Beijing, and maybe that's just maybe you're just having some fun with it, but maybe hopefully you are there. And another thing is that you are a trumpet player, so you are an experienced brass player, and it really shows in this arrangement. So, all right, so all of that research was done so that I could find out the context of your brass scoring. Now, this is really a lovely effort. I really don't have a big issue with a lot of things in here, although I'll have a few suggestions as we go along. But what it really reminds me of is British brass band scoring, which I think that you should totally get into because there are people arranging music for brass band across the Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, there are bands of players who have a specific there's a specific lineup to the British brass band, including kind of a section of cornets, including a soprano cornet, which is pretty much the equal of this piccolo trumpet in A in terms of its range. And then there's like a flugelhorn. There are E-flat alto horns. There are baritones, first, second, and bass trombone. There are two euphoniums. There are and then there are also an E-flat and a B-flat bass tuba, and the percussion section, timpani. So it is just a beautiful spectrum of sound, and you can just go on YouTube and check out, any British brass band recording, and just, there are people who are great euphonium soloists, and there are like cornet players. Usually the E-flat cornet player is like some of the best. It's just like one of the best players in the band. It just is a terrific player. So I'm recommending all of this because I feel that this would have been even better with that kind of a group. You could have, you could have explored textures and subtleties, and having a section of cornets is just really amazing. It's like having like strings or winds. The possibilities are just really amazing. All right, so I feel that your effort here showed a lot of promise, and maybe this is the first time you've tried this kind of scoring and you're kind of surprised at my enthusiasm about it, or maybe this is par for the course and you've already tried your hand at British brass band scoring, in which case I would say go for it. There is a really great introductory manual. I'm actually holding it in my hand right now, and it's by Andrew Duncan, and it's called Scoring and Arranging for Brass Band, and it's published by the Music Company, which is www.themusiccompanyshop.com is where you can get it. Okay, and it is a really great introduction. I have scored some for a British brass band myself, and it is just really, really fun, and there are a lot of community players who, there are actually films about people who's, living in small mining towns who eventually worked their way out of poverty by winning competitions and so on. Okay, so anyhow, so back to your score. Having said all of that, in terms of the scoring, it's really great. So I would basically think about a few things. Now, this is something, especially in the context of what I talked about before in the other scores, really applies here, and that is, do you really need the harmony to swell here? Because in the score, as I've mentioned several times now, in the score, it is the melody really that swells, right? That has the nuances, because there is just static harmony below. There's no way to make that static harmony swell on piano as you're holding the chord. There's only one little change in harmony, and that's just one single note, and that note isn't played louder by the left hand of the pianist, right? So it's really the melody that swells. And if it's the melody that swells, then there's no need for your trumpet player to diminish the intimacy of their sound by starting at mezzo piano, right? I mean, trumpet piano sounds so beautiful, right? It is a spectrum into itself. And giving it mezzo piano is to gray it out, to make it lukewarm, right? It's better for it to start soft and play into something, right? So in my way of thinking, for this context of scoring, this should be completely reversed at the beginning. Piano espressivo, crescendo, diminuendo, right? And that way the player can go, right? And the horns and trombone behind it can just go, right? They can just hold their little chord behind it. So anyhow, right, and then push into this, right, with gradually growing anticipation. So, like, you don't need, in my way of thinking, you don't need, especially with the registers of these instruments being brighter and louder just naturally, you don't need to mark your dynamics louder for your melodic players. Okay? So, here you're piano crescendo into mezzo piano, right? So you could start off piano, it's like same thing here, piano crescendo to mezzo piano, and even building from there. You might not even need to mark mezzo piano here at all, right? But then you kind of do need it for the bass trombone. All right. But yeah, I think that coming in here on thinking mezzo piano, see right here you're thinking mezzo piano, okay, crescendo, and then mezzo forte happens here so that it's sort of seamless, a kind of a seamless handoff. Not really overlapping, but a handoff. But I don't think you need to do that. So I think you just need to go, da, da, and then, look, just save the nuances for later. In everybody else, and just go da da, and then crescendo from here, right? Da bum. Or that way you can start piano espressivo, and you can just start your crescendo. Just leave these guys soft, and then you start from piano here, and then push into this, right? With everybody coming in at the same kind of level, right? Because nobody is going to have any problem hearing the trumpet. It is not going to be overwhelmed by the elements underneath it, right? Because we're all brass here, right? There's no big crisis about balancing things. I would say even with the horns, right? Because you're not you go all the way up to forte, so the horns are a little bit at a disadvantage, but this is going to be a sensitive forte right in here, right? And in fact, if you really hold off on the crescendo, you can even go up to mezzo forte here where the horns will not be at a disadvantage. Starting here, piano espressivo, not going to mezzo piano, not having this crescendo or anything else, just pushing into this, up to mezzo forte here, and then backing off, and then you don't have to worry about your horns balancing. All right? But I mean, that's a really small concern. You can go up to that nice bright forte if you want to, and it won't hurt anything. Yeah, so piccolo trumpet in A, going all the way up to that F sharp there. So, yeah, I'm just thinking is that? I think you can totally get that on the E flat cornet. Okay, yeah, and then that beautiful low tuba note right in there, right, and then back off, and here you are giving your players a destination dynamic of mezzo piano. That should be universal, right? Because, they'll resolve, and this player's, the piccolo trumpet player and the trombone player, their impression of how far to diminuendo will be completely ruled by, just the whole group. So, if you are having them follow what's going on in the rest of the ensemble, really listening to the players who are resolving the middle of the chord, right? And just then that makes a whole lot more sense than just giving a nebulous diminuendo there, right? Now, of course, in practice, the players will be listening to each other and they'll do it anyways, but you should make it uniform. That is my strong feeling. Okay. And look, you can go down to piano if you want to. I mean, mezzo piano is just such a lukewarm, I mean, look, especially for brass, be bold, all right? Be daring, okay? Just really think of piano and forte as being regions, okay? Go look at my the Venn diagram in my lecture on texture, balance, and function, the one on balance, okay? So, piano is a whole region, right? And forte is a whole region. And within those regions of force and restraint, there is a universe, right? So it's better to have a general dynamic of forte or a general dynamic of piano and then work from within with nuances, right? So like there's almost no nuances whatsoever in this. Like there's nothing to guide the player artistically, right? See, it's like it's the same thing right here that we have reversed, where you're giving the nuances to the support players and none at all to the soloist, right? We don't really get any nuances in the melody till right about here, right? I mean, what is that? So look, piano, just go down to piano. It's fine. And then da da da, right? Okay, and then so aside from that, I would say this is all scored pretty nicely. Now here we get to this part. Now, do we really want this da? Do we really want this all really slurred like this? The piano score has mezzo staccato, right? So right? And do we want it just to be a complete and total repeat, right? So it isn't like you're just kind of doing a reiteration, you're not doing an echo, and you're not doing call and response, right? So is there any way amongst this ensemble to echo or to have a response that is an octave lower, to have a response amongst different instruments, right? So that you just sort of have to ask, or different articulation. That's what I would really strongly suggest right there. And I think this is a little much, the accent right here. I would say maybe tenuto. Save your accents for right here. Bum, 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 bum. And here, like diminuendo to what? Right? Mezzo forte, diminuendo, and then you have mezzo forte in the bass. Right? So I think you need to rethink this. Bum, bum, bum. And then I like this. Mezzo forte, diminuendo in all parts, not just these three instruments. And then soft. It's perfectly fine to end just simple piano. And then have a little swell in the middle if you need to. Right? Like going up to mezzo piano and then back down. But the end piano or even pianissimo, just to bring it to an end. Now, of course, you scored way more on this, and I would really, really like to evaluate that, but I just really have to stick to the rules here. So I'll just say, just as I recommended to Guillermo, if you're going to put this much work, if you're going to do the entire thing, please consider supporting on Patreon, maybe at the dotted brev level, so that I can look at your entire score and give you feedback all the way through, because it just really seems unfair for you to do that much work and to not have me look at everything. But having said that, I mean, look, it's only 8 people, right? And you're a brass player, and I hope you're playing in ensembles. Maybe you're studying in Beijing, or you're working like teaching or as part of a performing group. Maybe you could get the people together to play this, and I think you should. And I think that you should record it if you can get it. If you get a good recording of it, you should post it to to YouTube and share it on Orchestration Online in the Facebook group. It would be really, really great to hear that. But just consider a lot of those things, like the subtlety of articulation, echoing or call and response, imitation rather than just repetition between these two phrases. And, do you really want it to be smooth rather than, it's like peanut butter. Do you want it to be smooth rather than chunky, right? Okay, with those comments, I will sign off on this. I just feel there's so much more to say, but I have to limit myself. But really great work, Noah, and thank you so much for being a website subscriber, and really looking forward if you can contribute a score to next year's Orchestration Challenge. I don't know if everybody is getting sick of the word transformational yet, but boy, this really applies. That definition applies to this. Once again, we see the material being expanded by the imagination resources of the arranger. So, Brandon, excellent work. And I want you to keep that in mind. My praise for it, despite any editing or, suggestions of changing things that I might add. Now, I noticed that you continued on and you were sort of experimenting with more things to add, and it, the da 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 da, and so on. So perhaps you had thought of scoring more. It would have been interesting to see. But let's focus on the way that this piece starts. And I feel that it's extremely strong that this starts with oboe. This is one of the very few scores that starts with oboe rather than flute. And, I'm almost wondering if people are feeling that flute is a sort of a default instrument to start with. That it's, that there's certainly a tradition in impressionist scoring to have like low flute parts, right? Which need to be supported very, very carefully, which some scores did and some didn't. But with oboe, it certainly is less of a concern. Like it's less of a balancing act. That. Of course, everything should be balanced, but it's less of a kind of sort of a scary thing to throw in oboe in its middle register. It's like the sweet spot. It's perfect, right? Those opening notes are absolutely perfect for oboe. Okay, there's just no need to, there's no need to worry at all. Okay, and same comments as I mentioned to others. There's kind of no need for the accompaniment to swell there. It's really the swell is in the melody, right? But if it's in there, that's fine. But if right now here divisi in 3, okay, but where do you need 3 voices, right? And in what way are you? I see what you're saying. Like you divisi of all the violas in 3. So like you've got one here, and then you've got these voices there, and yeah. I think that you should mark, like in a case like this where you got a boom chuck kind of a thing, it would be better to mark these as separate voices, like to sort of show that this is, like there is like one side of the one part of the violas is playing the same note as the others, and then they're playing separate notes. Going forward, I think that just works better. However, is there really a need for you to do this intensive a divisi right in here? Like, couldn't this pizzicato stuff right in here be split up between cello, like your divisi cello and viola, and then this note to be played by the seconds, right? I guess you want that tone quality of the viola itself, and it does combine quite nicely with second clarinet here. But the second clarinet will be, it will, when it adds its quality to the sound here, it will be heard as its own element, right? So you might as well just have, my feeling here is you might as well just have second violin on that. There's ways of dividing, of spreading all of this information across all of the strings without having to do so much intense divisi. So anyhow, that's just my feeling about it. And once again, we see the transformational element of kind of adding a little waltz, a little pizzicato waltz into the beginning. So it's kind of a very sprightly kind of a feeling right from the very beginning. So this is more like Lili rummaging through her dresser, to find some shoes for going outside, and and maybe primping up a little bit, so that she doesn't look like a total mess. So at the Villa Medici, they probably just had wash basins in each room rather than internal plumbing, like like having small bathrooms attached to the bedrooms. Yeah, so bum bum. So just like you have like single slurs over rather than dividing, like accompanying the nuances with articulated slurs. But that's fine. Yeah, getting kind of long on these slurs, but it's still okay. It's still acceptable. Here we've got some cool orchestration. We have the sort of fluttering bassoons and clarinets adding to the excitement here. And then I love the way you pull away from it here, and it still kind of has activity and life and energy all the way up to the fermata. Right, so that's really nicely done, and it's really just has to do more with the ascending registers and continuing motion in certain instruments like harp. You got this little with the piccolo, and it's almost too much when you have these little grace notes right in there, but it's still fine, right? It's just right on the edge of being a little too much, pointing at the downbeat, right? So there's ways of doing it and having grace notes on everything, sort of like Les Tombeaux de Couperin by Ravel. And then there's, then you can easily overdo it with just kind of big Hollywood gestures. So, but I would say here you got a really good balance. All right. And then this little stuff scored in here with the horns. There's a zero reason for you to be scoring 1, 3, 2, 4 in here, because you don't really do, if you don't do big unisons with the first and the third going really high, there's no need to save space, right? So this could just be scored with, with 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And it would work perfectly fine. There would just be, there just was kind of no need to pair them up, right? And then here you've got 2 and 4 working together, and then 1 and 3. And actually, what should be happening here is this should be 3 and 4, and this should be 1 and 2, right? Because you want the partners, the seat partners who sit next to each other and listen to each other all the time and really can nail each other's intonation, right? That's what you want there. You don't want to, like, the people who are 2 seats away from each other and, are not as closely linked. Okay, so, yeah, and then this nice little tuba underpinning right in here. It's going to be very, very firm. And it's interesting that you, do not bring in double bass at all here, but you've got this big low tuba doubling the cellos. And kind of no bassoon helping out at all, right? So it's gonna make the bottom end very firm and very solid. Okay, even if you mark down the tuba a bit, right? So like all of this brass in here should definitely be softer, right? So mezzo piano in your winds and strings, this should be piano, right? Piano crescendo to mezzo piano, right? Same thing here. Right in here, I would say started pianissimo, crescendo to mezzo piano at the loudest. Otherwise, that rock bottom note is going to be just totally solid, maybe too solid. You want I know what you want in here, and that's a beautiful blend and balance of elements and everything else. So, and here, you could go diminuendo to piano and pianissimo in the brass, is what I would say. Okay, now, my only critique here is that you really just use the same solo instrument right in here. Right now, here's where you could actually score lower flute, and the accompaniment is so delicate that it would completely work, right? So I think you'd need to vary your solo voice, because it's just like, oh yeah, here, back to the beginning, right? What's the big difference? These two are exactly the same, right? Same dynamic level, same exact thing that already happened, except you've got nuances marked here and you don't here, which I don't understand why not, right? However, this could just be piano here, just everybody else shut up, dum, right? And then here, different, maybe clarinet instead, right? So yeah, just think of varying your like these entrances so that it just isn't just a carbon copy of what happened before, because it's something that's like, oh yeah, right, I heard that before, right? You want to stimulate your audience's imagination just by constantly introducing new elements and interesting things for them to do. So otherwise it feels a little bit more like you wrote it for that, like for a student, like a student oboe player, like, oh, let's give them all the solos, right? And then just touches of timpani. It's all really great in here. I mean, this is nicely scored, right? There's just nothing that is really out of line or anything. Ba-da-da-da. It's really nicely done. And now, you've got your bum bum bum, and that works fine. Okay, no problems there. And then you answer it with dee dee dee. It's nice that you're only going up to piano here, right? You're not, and then your echo is pianissimo, so you don't have to worry about washing over into the into the next phrase and diminishing the. I gotta stop using the word diminished, and lessening the impact of the downbeat. Okay, but I really love the pizzicato, the staccato horns, and what's going on in here. Like maybe rethink the dynamics you've got here. Don't always mark your, like if you've got a piano texture, you do not have to mark your melody instrument mezzo piano, right? Because as I've explained before, and I hope you'll take this to heart if I have already critiqued you on this and not do this again. Okay, mezzo piano is a sort of a lukewarm temperature, right, for the color of your instrument. So piano crescendo, piano with nuances, is a much stronger, much more colorful, intimate, beautiful quality of sound for your soloists when they're carrying the melody, right? Whereas mezzo piano is much more useful for like being headed in another direction dynamically, or for being like part of a texture. Okay, but like a solo instrument, like really saying something, it's better if it is an intimate piano with some nuances to go louder and softer and to work within the texture, right? You can write solo after it, and then the orchestra will balance to that and stay out of its way. But, don't just automatically think, yeah, mezzo piano. Well, they're mezzo piano in the texture. We'll just put a mezzo forte on the melody. That is not needed, and go do some score reading, because that's not the way that it happens. Think of the texture as being one thing, right? And especially like piano, which is such a beautiful place for the orchestra to be, right? And then use the nuances to move your melody around in terms of its emphasis, and and spread it around a little bit. What are these poor guys doing here in the clarinets? Clarinets and flutes are not going to do anything while your oboe player just sort of honks over them, right? Everybody should have some of the same dynamic motion here, right? Okay. And then we get to here. I think the horns need to be really soft. Okay, so if you just really want, you want an echo kind of an effect on your celesta. Wow, that's going to be soft. So, like, I would say triple P on your horns. Okay, because otherwise they'll just really take over. The overtones will be enough to kind of blot out stuff that's happening in the celesta, especially on lower, less satisfying sounds. All right, the first octave of celesta has a kind of a thunky sound, and very few celestas are able to go below C in the bass staff. Okay, so watch out for that. All right. And then finally ending with bum 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 bum. Yeah, okay, divisi, arco, flautando. Yeah, okay, that, I'm noticing some flautando being used a lot. Okay, so just, it's a fast, light bow, almost soltasto, almost having a kind of a harmonic sound, but not really. It's all good. Okay, I'm not so sure that it will be really heard at all over these mezzo forte strings. Right, so maybe it'd be better just to like have this, as a trill in the winds, and yeah, just to give it a little bit more of a variance from the string tone. So the strings will really completely dominate this whole passage right in here. The addition of the clarinets to it will give it a very direct sound, right? So, but the winds will not actually dominate. They'll be absorbed into the sound of the strings here, which I think is what you wanted, right? And then ending here with your little resolution, lower brass, everything else. Okay, that'll all work fine. So yeah, so just a really satisfying score, Brandon. Just really, really wonderful to look at, and I see the potential here that you had some more ideas to go on with and explore the piece more. So yeah, it just makes me wonder how you might possibly deal with the material that I've got coming up for next year. Just intriguing to think about that. So thanks for such a great entry, and for being a subscriber to the website. And so wow, I can't believe there's only one more score for this round. Things are just going nice and quick today. I think I might be able to do a couple of videos today. So thanks everybody, and now on to the very last entry for this round of scores. Now, one last really great score from Victor. And Victor, I really love what you did with this. I think that there are a few things that you sort of need to rethink how you're approaching articulation and dynamic markings and so on and so forth. Okay, but the general impression I get from this is a very workable score. Okay, so right here at the beginning, I really like what you're doing here, like with the solo flute, bum bum, and then you supply the other melody note with the second clarinet. That's really, really lovely. Okay, the thing about it is, though, that like this is going to be incredibly weak, right? Like you've got mezzo piano marked for your flute, and then you got this really weak written A, right? Which is supposed to be sounding F sharp in your A clarinet, and then you got mezzo forte pizzicato, right? So what is anybody going to hear in here? They're going to hear that pizzicato just ringing out. Okay, so here is a way of rethinking your dynamics at the very beginning. Okay, leave the horns at pianissimo, then everybody else should play piano, right? Including your soloist. Your soloist and your clarinet player, like your flute, your first flute, and you don't have to say flute one. If there's only a single flute, then just write flute, right? If there's only one oboe, just write, oboe. It's fine. Same thing with bassoon, right? But, clarinet and A, 1 and 2, that's fine. Like, I mean, I see what you're doing here with the markings, but maybe that was just some default that was set with, with the way that you had your template. However, you don't need the one if there's only one instrument, right? We know, okay? See, this implies that this is part of a greater piece that has other instruments added on later on, or maybe, maybe this first page is just all the instruments that will fit on this first page, and then later on there will be more instruments, right? And that just confuses the issue for everybody. Just write flute if there's only one flute. Don't write flute 1. Okay, so, but back to the orchestration here. So, have your melodic instruments, right? The instruments here that are joining together melodically, clarinet and flute, both marked piano, but with the crescendo, like crescendo and then diminuendo that's in the original score, right? So da da, right? So that the players will just see that the way that it all fits together, right? And they'll be part of a gesture. And I like the fact that there aren't any other nuances. Now, as to this pizzicato here, just write this with, I would say, with the tenuto mark, right? And it's still marked piano, right? So you'll get the emphasis, you'll get the blockier tone, or you could have pizzicato accent but still piano, right? Because I feel mezzo forte is just too strong in the first place, and it's like the wrong idea. It really is just an accented pizzicato at piano that you want right in here, right? And then that is enough to supply in there, right? So once again, everything piano except for the horns, accent or tenuto mark on this, okay, and then nuances here like crescendo and diminuendo. And then you're fine, right? I would actually write solo on this, right? And in this case, you don't have to write one solo, as I've been counseling everybody else, because you only got one flute, right? So it's okay to just write solo. And this was really nice, too, the way that you threw in this little dotted rhythm here. Da, bum, bum. That just really, really nice, very natural interacting between the two instruments to come up with tones that, melodic tones that suspend through, well, I should stop using the word suspend. So melodic tones that hold throughout other, the continuation of the arc. Right? It's just really a lovely way of thinking about it. And then this is similar to some of my approaches. Da, 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 bum, bum. Okay, so that all works great, and I love throwing in this this artificial harmonic right in here to get that high F sharp. That's really nice. Of course, like just hitting that high F sharp, going up to it written, like just a regular stop is fine. Now, if this were like up an octave, then you would get the really, really high pitch if you needed it. But you don't, because just the way that you managed how the melody unfolds right there. All right, so just really, really nice. And I like bringing in the muted trumpet right in here. You're just keeping everything soft. That's really nice. But I feel like you have a surge right here, right, in your melody. That should be present throughout the rest of the strings and winds, right? And, mezzo forte, celesta, that's as loud as you're going to get. Harp should also be loud here. And then pull back, like have a diminuendo on the last bar, right? And then you can start fresh. Now here, the problem that we get into is a massive amount of dynamic mixing. Okay, so the problem with dynamic mixing is that everybody is sitting in front of their stand reading their own music. Clarinets are sitting there, they're obviously part of the action along with the first flute, and they're saying they got a mezzo piano marking and the first flute is playing mezzo forte. And let's think, well, geez, that's a pretty loud mezzo piano, but I better play along with them, right? Because I don't want to be too soft here. And then meanwhile, like you've got your horns sitting close to the trombones. They've got a P marking, and the tenor and bass trombones have got a pianissimo marking. And do you see what I'm saying? It's just like nobody really knows what's on anybody else's part. The best approach to take is, rather than having a bunch of different things that, having a texture that only works because different elements are at different volumes all throughout, it's better to just use those instruments that will balance naturally with the same marking, except for, the proviso that that brass should be marked down a little bit if you want a really beautiful texture that merges together, right? And the brass are used to that. They're aware of that difference between them and the strings and the winds. So, what's the point of starting at mezzo piano? It is such a lukewarm kind of a dynamic, right? Why not just go back to piano, and throw in some nuances, da 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 da, dum, da 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 da. It's a little strange the way that you've got this, you've got this lower rather than higher. Yeah. Yeah, so you're still doing some of the little kind of like tweaking of the melody, which is kind of cool. Bum 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 from your horn. That's nice, and then trumpet, helping out right in here. The trumpet is going to be easily stronger than the clarinet and so on. So so here is really where just kind of what to do really. I would say, once again, piano, nuances on the melody, perhaps some in the accompaniment as well, and then elements which are melodic or have motion in the brass could also be piano, and then everybody else pianissimo. Okay, now here the danger with the timpani is that it's just getting overused. It's getting. Pizzicato is something that you can continue to hear without remarking on mentally, right? And the same thing is true of harp. Are you really sure you want staccato? Like you want this sort of a secco sound? Like you want the kind of stopped? You really want that F sharp to be just cut off? There's kind of no need for it, right? Now, maybe that was a copy-paste error from the timpani. And there's kind of no need for the staccato, to just a sudden cutoff on the F sharp. It's not going to hurt anything if there's a little bit of overhang. But there's no need to mark dotted half notes here on these timpani strokes. You're better off just having like just have a regular quarter note or half note if you must, because like those the sound is going to get absorbed into the arco strings, right? Okay, but like the first one is cool, the second and third ones are cool, but then when you get into like dun 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 dun, and then we just have timpani again, right? It just gets a little tiring it's just sort of like yeah, like the first couple times it's like, oh wow man, timpani. And then after a while I say, yeah, timpani again. Right? It's just better to use instruments that don't, their novelty doesn't start to become unwelcome. Yeah, but otherwise, I really love the idea of flute above, clarinet, and trumpet below. That's a cool combination. But really, realistically speaking, the trumpet will outplay the clarinet. So if they're really playing like similar pitches or like interacting on the same pitches a lot, then it's really better maybe for the trumpet to be pianissimo as well. Okay, then here I would say bring it out, right? Like you mezzo forte in the strings and the winds, and then mezzo piano in the brass. Now here, I'm not sure if you're aware of what a tenuto sound is for winds and brass, but it is a complete block, right? So like most articulated notes are an attack. Oops, sorry about that. There's an attack, like a spike at the beginning. So a spike, and then it levels off, and then the player shapes the note, and then brings it to a close, right? But with a tenuto mark, it's just attack, sustain, release, right? It's just a on and off switch, right? And it's almost a legato, but not exactly, right? Because each note is just really is a separate entity, but the duration lasts until exactly the beginning of the next note, right? So it's not really a connected sound. It's more of just like sounds stuck together, crammed together. So bum 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 bum, right? So I mean, if you're going to have that kind of force, then everybody should be doing it. But I mean, it is not the same thing at all as what's in the original score, which is mezzo staccato, right? Da 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 da, right? So we're kind of losing the elegance. It's just really kind of blocky and blundering, right? But I mean, if that's what you want in there, maybe that is what you should do. But that's why I'm wondering whether or not you're aware of the consequences of putting a tenuto there, right? And of course, the celesta will not be heard at all. It's just too soft to compete with this much mass. And then you have your echo muted. I would say stopped, because there's like almost no time to stick the mutes in between the end here and then, I mean, yeah, some people can pop them in and take them out and so on and so forth really quickly, but you'd have to say hang mutes right here. So they would have them sitting on a string and then just wham them in, like, just really quickly into the bells. I would say it's better just to stop. You get the same general sound more or less. And that works good with the pizzicato. So pizzicato, I would say here, pizzicato piano, stopped horns, pianissimo, right? And then bum, bum, bum. Why is it so soft, right? I mean, like mezzo forte, piano, right? Where's our reaction? Where's our strength, right? Why can't everybody be mezzo forte and then the brass mezzo piano, right? But this is like not balanced the way it is, right? The way this is, the brass will overplay the strings and the winds will be very, very, ephemeral, right? So I would say mezzo forte throughout. Give yourself some nice strength. Work out what kind of slurring you want here. Like you got a big old slur over some wind parts, none on the brass and none on the strings. So you really want bow, 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 right? Would you rather have da da da, right? I mean, there's a way of doing this. Maybe you didn't think that out entirely, but I mean, as far as the scoring is concerned, nothing all too wrong with it. There's a lot of weight on the upper winds, and then the brass below, and then you have the brass combining with the strings below. But what if the strings combined more with the upper winds, and there was more weight above with the strings, or the strings played octaves while the winds and the brass supplied more of the harmony? All right, that might be a better mixture, because as it is right here, the string sound will really get absorbed into the brass, even if you do balance it. All right, there'll still be a string sound if it's balanced, say mezzo forte against piano or mezzo piano. But but like the strings will seem a little weak and shallow above, right, without any doubling by the strings. I mean, it's just a consequence of that. So it's it's not the most elegantly conceived tutti right in there. Okay, well, that's all I have to say about it. But I mean, some great ideas in here, Victor, and just think about, there's not anything too wrong about some of this scoring, but just think about some basics of orchestral balance and relationships of the instruments towards one another, and trying to keep your dynamics simpler and more effective, and thinking of the dynamic as being something that the orchestra understands as one thing that they all work together towards, right, rather than being so compartmentalized in different dynamic ranges and different areas, right? And that way you get much smoother crescendos and diminuendos, and there could have been a lot more nuances in the melody and so on and so forth, right? So just think about some of those things, and please enter next year's orchestration challenge. I would just really love that. Okay, so that is all I've got to say about all 6 of these scores, and I think I've got it in me to do one more today. So thanks everybody very much, and I will see you in the next video.